Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlicker, shills, debt slicers, peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks. I'm Useful Idiot. Welcome. And let's go to Saudi Arabia because unlike the other Fox News, this Fox News is fair and balanced. And since I did a video about the striking poverty that we have in Israel, a very wealthy state, I thought I'd take a look at the poverty in Saudi Arabia because that would be another good example of income disparity, and take a good look at a Muslim monarchy and see how they deal with this issue. And of course, they have vast oil wealth and a lavish royalty. And even though the elites in Israel live pretty high in the hog, nobody in the world has any illusions about how lavish and how much money can be spent by the monarchy and the royal family in Saudi Arabia. It boggles the mind, and is wealth spent on a level that is truly stunning, even on a historical level globally. And theoretically, 25% live in poverty in Saudi Arabia, and that's the native Saudi population. And I find that figure a little hard to grasp because of the fact that there are so many welfare programs if you are a Saudi national living in Saudi Arabia. Part of the problem is the population has grown so fast. One of the reasons why I think Saudi Arabia is taking a good close look at its future right now and shifting its economy away from dominance by oil. Its population grew from 1970, it was 6 million, and today it's 28 million. So a very large population, and that certainly stands in contrast to Israel with a mere 8 or 9 million people, 28 million in Saudi Arabia. And kind of funny that only 3 years ago the World Bank declared that Saudi Arabia had the 10th lowest poverty rate in the world at 12.7%. And as I always say, the truth probably lies somewhere in between. If there's some declarations that poverty in Saudi Arabia is 25%, and the World Bank comes up with a 12% figure, then it's probably somewhere around the 18% zone, which puts it a little lower than Israel and other countries suffering from this problem, certainly in Asia, Africa, and most of the regions of the world. The population of poverty level of populations most notably low, at least according to official figures in the Western world, Australia, Europe, and America. So anyway, Saudi Arabia, of course, has spent a lot of time trying to hide its poverty problem, and in fact, in 2011, 3 Saudi online bloggers were jailed for even talking about poverty. And I'll attach the documentary and the leaked footage that they produced below, at least what I could get my hands on, and also some other, a lot of other interesting documents posted below, looking at the poverty levels in Saudi Arabia. Some of what figures I came across were 2 to 4 million living in poverty, which if you have a population of 28 million, certainly isn't that 25% number living in poverty that was touted. So 2 to 4 million living in poverty puts their poverty rate at a much lower rate, probably more around that 12%. But who knows? All these figures are rough estimates because there's no way to get any official numbers whatsoever, really, on poverty levels in Saudi Arabia. And then there's the whole issue of foreign workers. Apparently, they have what they call stateless people living in Saudi Arabia, and they have 70,000 stateless people living in Saudi Arabia. But this, as far as I can tell, none of these poverty numbers include the stateless people, but only the native Saudi population, not foreign workers. So once again, the numbers kind of go back up. If the poverty rate amongst Saudi citizens is around 12%, and then you add in the stateless, then the number goes back up. But the $300 billion a year comes in from oil, and King Abdullah alone is worth $18 billion. So an interesting contrast to the way wealth transfer and wealth inequality happens around the world. We have this huge, unimaginable gap, and that's one of the things that makes Saudi Arabia all the more egregious. Maybe their poverty level may be relatively low for that part of the world, as well it should be, but the fact that the monarchy and the Saudi elites live such an incredibly ostentatious life makes more than makes up for any success they might have in their war on poverty. And there has been a lot of efforts in Saudi Arabia actually to address the poverty and unemployment. But like I say, they have so many welfare programs. A good example is that more than 2/3 of Saudis under 30 do not have jobs, and 3/4 of all unemployed are in their 20s. And so we have this young sector, and particularly because 50% of the population in Saudi Arabia, I believe, is under 30. And so they have a very young population. Another reason why they have to be concerned about the future and the fact that young people are certainly more easily radicalized. But to stave off any hopes of a Arab Spring in Saudi Arabia, King Abdullah kicked in a lot of extra rewards to an already generous welfare system in Saudi Arabia. He announced spending $37 billion on housing, wage increases, unemployment benefits, poverty programs, including micro lending, job training, and just plain new jobs for the poor. And like I say, the welfare program there for Saudi citizens is pretty substantial. They get Social Security benefits of $5,000 a year for being a Saudi citizen with no breadwinner in the family. They have universal free education, universal free health care, even free burials. And then there's pensions for all Saudi citizens, and then monthly benefits and payments for food and utilities for all the poor, elderly, disabled, orphans, and injured workers. And this is the kind of benefits that we see in a lot of welfare states, and Saudi Arabia seems to be no exception. But unlike a lot of countries, certainly they can absorb a certain amount of this spending. One of the things that came up that was pretty interesting is the fact that much of the welfare spending is based on an Islamic system called zakat, a religious requirement that 2.5% of personal and corporate wealth be donated to the poor. But even though that is the system they use there, and that's what's used to fund all the welfare programs, there's really no way to access how much money is actually donated, except for government numbers that are handed out. With a government like Saudi Arabia is just like all the other governments in the world, full of corruption and nepotism. The idea of getting any real numbers, of course, is out of the question. But in 1999, Saudi Arabia had 120,000 millionaires worth $400 billion. And so that is a good indication of 20 years ago, roughly 20 years ago, that the upper class in Saudi Arabia is far beyond the living conditions of its very lowest citizens. And like I say, with a culture of welfare, things going so well in Saudi Arabia so far. And then recently a report came out last year actually pointing to the future and extrapolating that poverty and all these social issues that Saudi Arabia hasn't suffered from too greatly so far will become a lot bigger issues. And once again, that probably has a big reason why there's been huge moves within the Saudi government to readjust their economy and make way for developments in the future in Saudi Arabia, particularly with this large young population that will be growing up, and it's going to need something to do. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.